He just wanted to return a wallet, but ended up finding a clue from the past that could bring down one of the most powerful families in the country. Boston awakened shrouded in a light but biting mist that seemed to weigh on the tall buildings of Beacon Hill and the forgotten alleys of the less affluent neighborhoods. In one of these alleys, at the crossroads between poverty and hope, lived Ethan Miller, a 12-year-old street kid, resourceful and resilient, orphaned since the age of 6. He slept under awnings, survived on leftovers, evaded social services and collected broken promises. The only real memory of his mother was a blurred image preserved in his memory. Sweet eyes, dark hair, and a scent that time had erased. Nothing more than that. On that morning, as he walked through Copley Square looking for discarded cans to recycle, Ethan saw something slip from the pocket of a hurried man exiting a luxury car. It was a leather wallet, visibly expensive. Ethan quickly picked it up, looking around, evaluating his options. When he opened it, driven by the impulse to check what was inside, he expected to find money, perhaps a document, maybe a credit card. He found all that, and something that made him stop breathing for a second. Among the $100 bills there was an old photograph, a faded portrait of a woman, but not just any woman. It was her, the image his memory had always tried to reconstruct. That was the woman he believed to be his mother. Stunned, he followed the man until he saw him enter an imposing building in Back Bay, one of the most expensive areas in the city. The name on the facade gleamed in golden letters, Bennett Enterprises. With the wallet still in his hands and his heart racing, Ethan made a decision. He would confront this man, even if he had nothing to lose. In the lobby, security guards stopped him. He tried to argue, show the wallet, but no one paid attention to a dirty boy with a suspicious look. That was when an assistant noticed the commotion and called the man by name. Mr. Richard Bennett, CEO of the conglomerate. Ethan stepped in front of him and raised the photograph. He said nothing at first. He just extended his arm and let the image speak for itself. Richard, a rigid, imposing man with grey hair and an impeccably tailored suit, stopped as if he had been struck by lightning. His eyes widened, and for a moment time froze. But he quickly regained his composure, took the wallet back, and dismissed the boy with coldness, without answering the only question that escaped Ethan's lips. "Is this my mom in the picture?" Rejected but even more determined, Ethan spent the following days lurking around the building, trying to discover more about that man. He found out that Richard was one of the most influential businessmen in Massachusetts, with an impeccable public image, married to an elegant woman named Victoria, and with no acknowledged children. No one talked about Lucy, the woman in the photo. No trace of her on the family's social media. No mention in news reports. But someone knew, and Ethan intended to find out. On a rainy night, he sneaked into the grounds of the Bennett family mansion in Brookline, hoping to find answers. He was surprised by a house employee, an elderly woman named Mrs. Hazel, who, upon seeing the photo, whispered something Ethan would never forget. This young lady, she worked here, she was good, disappeared suddenly. Before he could ask more, security guards chased him away. Knowing there was more behind Richard's reaction, Ethan searched public records and sought help at a local NGO, where a volunteer managed to guide him. With access to old documents, Ethan discovered that a woman named Lucy Miller had worked as a domestic assistant at the Bennett residence 13 years ago. After a sudden leave, she vanished from the records with no official justification. It was as if she had ceased to exist. Ethan, now certain that Lucy was his mother, sought out Richard again, this time with more firmness. The businessman received him in private, away from the eyes of the press or his wife. The conversation was tense. Richard confirmed that he knew Lucy, but denied any relationship beyond the professional. He said he didn't know what had happened to her, but his eyes trembled, and his tone was too defensive for an innocent man. Deep down, Ethan felt that he was hiding something, and he was right. The day after their meeting, Ethan managed to slip a note to one of the newer maids at the Bennett mansion. The note simply asked if anyone remembered Lucy Miller, who had worked there years ago. It was a shot in the dark, but Ethan needed more information. 2 days later, the same maid, Jenny Wilson was her name, met him in a small coffee shop 3 blocks from the mansion. She was nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder. "I shouldn't be here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Bennet would fire me instantly. You know something about Lucy Miller? Ethan leaned forward, his heart pounding. Jenny nodded slightly. Not much. But there are old staff who remember her. They say she was beautiful, smart. They say she hesitated. What? They say what? They say Mr. Bennet was different around her, happier. They say Mrs. Bennet noticed it too. Jenny took a quick sip of her coffee. There's a locked room in the east wing. No one's allowed in except Mrs. Bennet and Mr. Bennet. Some say it has things from the past they want to forget. Ethan processed this information, his mind racing. A locked room, secrets, the photograph. It all pointed to something hidden, something important. There's one more thing, Jenny said, standing up to leave. There was an old gardener, Hank. He retired last year, but he worked for the Bennets for over 30 years. If anyone knows what happened back then, it's him. She slid a piece of paper across the table. This is his address, but please don't tell anyone I helped you. Ethan took the paper, hope rekindling in his chest. Thank you. I won't forget this. That night, as Ethan huddled under a store awning to escape the November chill, he stared at the photograph of the woman he believed to be his mother. The resemblance was striking, the same deep-set eyes, the same curve of the jaw. For years he'd convinced himself that the fragmented memories of his early childhood were just wishful thinking, dreams he'd crafted to fill the void of not knowing his origins. But now, with the photograph in his hands and new leads to follow, Ethan allowed himself something he'd carefully guarded against for years: hope. Tomorrow he would find this Hank person. Tomorrow he might finally start piecing together the truth of who he was and why he had spent his life alone on the streets of Boston when a potential father lived in a mansion not 5 miles away. As the city lights flickered through the mist, Ethan carefully tucked the photograph into his jacket pocket, close to his heart. Whatever truth awaited him, he was ready to face it. For the first time in years, he fell asleep with a name on his lips: Lucy Miller, and the determination to uncover what had happened to her and why Richard Bennet had looked at her photograph as though he'd seen a ghost. The address Jenny had given Ethan led to a modest bungalow in Dorchester. The small front yard was immaculate, every inch cultivated with precision that spoke of a lifetime of gardening expertise. Ethan stood at the gate for several minutes, gathering his courage. This Hank person might hold answers he'd spent years seeking, but what if those answers weren't what he wanted to hear? Finally, he approached the door and knocked. After a long moment, it opened to reveal an elderly African-American man with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Can I help you, son?" the man asked, leaning slightly on a cane. Ethan swallowed hard. "Are you Hank? The one who used to work for the Bennets?" The old man's expression changed, grew cautious. "Who's asking?" Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph. "I need to know about her." "Lucy Miller." Hank stared at the photo, then at Ethan's face. His eyes widened slightly. "Lord have mercy," he whispered. "Come inside, boy. Come inside." Hank's living room was warm and filled with plants. He moved slowly to an armchair and gestured for Ethan to sit on the couch. "So you're Lucy's boy," he said. It wasn't a question. "You knew her?" Ethan leaned forward eagerly. "Knew her? I watched her arrive at the Bennet house fresh out of college, looking for work while she saved for graduate school." Hank shook his head. "Smart girl, kind, too kind for that household, maybe. What happened to her? Why did she leave?" Hank sighed deeply. "It's not a simple story, son, and not entirely mine to tell. But you deserve to know your history." He looked Ethan over. "When's the last time you ate a proper meal?" Ethan shrugged. It had been days. "I'll fix us some lunch and we'll talk. But first I need to know, what exactly do you know about your mother? About your early years?" "Almost nothing," Ethan admitted. "I was in foster care from age 6. Before that, just fragments. I remember a small apartment. A woman with dark hair who smelled like vanilla. I remember her reading to me. Then she was gone and I was in the system. I ran away when I was 10. Been on the street since." Hank nodded sadly. "And now you've found your way to the Bennets. That's no coincidence, I expect." He rose slowly. "Come help an old man in the kitchen. We'll talk while we cook." As they prepared a simple meal of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, Hank began to fill in the blanks of a story Ethan had only glimpsed. Lucy came to work at the Bennet mansion in 2010. Victoria Bennet hired her as a personal assistant, managing schedules, handling correspondence, that sort of thing. At first, everything was fine. Lucy was efficient, respectful, kept to herself. Richard was rarely home, always traveling for business. But that changed about a year into her employment. Hank paused to stir the soup. Richard started working from home more. Said he needed a break from travel. Around that same time, Victoria became involved with some high society charitable foundation that took her away from the house for days at a time. And Richard and Lucy, Ethan began. At first, it was just conversations. I'd see them in the garden, talking for hours. She made him laugh, something Victoria rarely managed. Lucy was educated, curious about the world. And Richard, for all his wealth and status, was a lonely man. Ethan set plates on the small kitchen table as Hank continued. I'm not saying it was right what happened next. Both of them knew better. But there was something genuine between them, not just attraction but a real connection. By spring 2011 they were in love. They thought they were discreet, but in a house like that, wolves have eyes. Did Victoria find out? Ethan asked. Eventually. Around Christmas 2011, I overheard a terrible argument, Victoria threatening to ruin him, take everything in a divorce. Richard begging her to be reasonable. The next day, Lucy didn't come to work, or the day after. When I asked Victoria about it, she said Lucy had resigned for personal reasons. They sat down to eat, but Ethan could barely taste the food, focused entirely on Hank's words. A few weeks later, Richard came to me in the greenhouse. He looked terrible, hadn't been sleeping. He asked if I'd heard from Lucy. I hadn't. He gave me an envelope with cash, asked me to get it to her if I ever did hear from her. Said he was worried. Hank's eyes grew distant with the memory. I never got the chance. 3 months later, news came through the staff grapevine that Lucy had left Boston. No one knew where she'd gone. But she didn't leave, Ethan said quietly. She stayed in Boston. With me, Hank nodded slowly. Which means she must have had her reasons for letting Richard believe she'd gone. He studied Ethan's face carefully. You were born in August 2012, weren't you? Ethan nodded, the implication clear. 8 months after Lucy disappeared from the Bennet house. The timing, Hank didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. So Richard Bennet is my father, Ethan said, the word strange on his tongue. Seems likely. The resemblance is there, especially around the eyes. Hank sighed. But knowing it and proving it are different matters. And even if you could prove it, what then? The Bennets are powerful people, son. They protect what's theirs, and they destroy what threatens them. I'm not trying to threaten anyone, Ethan protested. I just want to know the truth. About my mother, about why she left me, about who I am. Hank reached across the table and placed a gnarled hand on Ethan's arm. Your mother was a good woman, boy. Whatever happened, whatever choices she made, don't doubt that she loved you. Then why did she leave me in foster care? The question that had haunted Ethan for years finally escaped. That I don't know, but I suspect it wasn't by choice. Hank's expression darkened. Victoria Bennet is not someone to cross, and she would have seen Lucy's child, Richard's child, as the ultimate betrayal, as a threat to everything she'd built. After lunch, Hank showed Ethan to a small spare bedroom. You'll stay here tonight. No arguments. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps. For the first time in years, Ethan slept in a real bed, with clean sheets and without one eye open for danger. When he woke the next morning, Hank was already in the kitchen making phone calls. Got hold of an old friend, he told Ethan over breakfast. Jasmine Phillips. She was the Bennets' housekeeper back then, close to Lucy. She might know more about what happened after Lucy left the Bennet house. Where is she now? Retired to Salem, about an hour north of the city. She's expecting us this afternoon. As they drove north in Hank's ancient but meticulously maintained Buick, Ethan watched the city give way to suburbs, then to the historic streets of Salem. They pulled up to a neat colonial house a few blocks from the famous witch museums. A tall black woman with silver hair greeted them at the door, hugging Hank warmly, before turning curious eyes to Ethan. My stars, she breathed, if you aren't the spitting image of your mother. Inside, over tea and cookies, Jasmine filled in more pieces of the puzzle. Lucy confided in me when she discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified, not of having a baby, but of what Victoria might do if she found out. Richard had given her money to leave town. Start fresh somewhere else, but Lucy loved Boston. Thought she could make it work here, raise you on her own. What happened to her? Ethan asked the question that had haunted him for years. Jasmine's eyes grew sad. Honey, I wish I knew for certain. We stayed in touch after you were born. I visited sometimes, brought baby gifts. You were the sweetest little thing. She smiled at the memory. Lucy was managing, had a job at a bookstore, a tiny apartment in Jamaica Plain. Then, when you were about 5, she called me, frantic. Said Victoria had found her. Said she'd been threatened. Threatened how? Hank asked. Lucy wouldn't say exactly. Just that Victoria had made it clear that if Lucy ever contacted Richard or tried to claim any Bennett money for Ethan, there would be consequences. A week later, Lucy called again. Said she had to go away for a while. Asked if I could watch Ethan. I said of course, but she never brought him. Never called again. Jasmine blinked back tears. I tried to find her. Filed a missing persons report. Nothing came of it. Then a month later I got a letter. No return address. Just a note saying Ethan was safe in foster care, and I should forget I ever knew either of them. Ethan sat silently in the back seat of Hank's Buick as they drove back to Boston, his mind racing with everything he'd learned from Jasmine. The pieces were coming together, but the picture they formed was darker than he'd imagined. His mother hadn't abandoned him by choice. She'd been forced away, threatened by Victoria Bennett. But why? What had happened to Lucy after that final phone call to Jasmine? You're awful quiet back there, Hank said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. Just thinking, Ethan replied. If Victoria Bennett threatened my mum, made her put me in foster care, shouldn't someone know? Shouldn't there be consequences? Hank sighed heavily. Justice isn't always straightforward, son, especially when you're dealing with people who have money and influence. So we just give up? Let them get away with it? I didn't say that. Hank's voice was firm. But we need to be smart. The Bennetts have resources we don't. Going up against them head-on would be like throwing yourself against a brick wall. When they arrived back at Hank's house, they found someone waiting on the porch, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a determined set to her jaw. That's Megan Carter, Hank said with surprise. Used to be a reporter for the Boston Globe. Now she runs an investigative news site. Wonder what brings her here. Megan stood as they approached. Hank Williams, I've been trying to reach you. Well, you found me. What can I do for you, Miss Carter? I'm working on a story about corporate practices at Bennett Enterprises. Her eyes shifted to Ethan with curiosity. Who's this? My grandson, Hank said smoothly. Visiting for the weekend. Ethan saw the lie for what it was, protection, and played along, nodding politely. Inside, after sending Ethan to the spare room with assurances they'd call him for dinner, Hank and Megan spoke in low voices in the living room. Ethan, never one to be left out of important conversations, positioned himself just out of sight in the hallway. I've heard rumors about Richard Bennett, Megan was saying, that he's not the ethical businessman he presents himself as. That there might be workplace issues, perhaps even harassment cases that were settled quietly. What's your interest in this? Hank asked cautiously. Bennett Enterprises is bidding for a major state contract. Taxpayer money. The public deserves to know who they're getting into bed with. Megan leaned forward. My sources tell me you worked for the family for decades, that you might know things others don't. I was just a gardener, Miss Carter. Gardeners see things, hear things, especially ones who worked for a family for 30 years. There was a long silence before Hank spoke again. I'm not comfortable discussing my former employers, but I will say this. Look into Victoria Bennett more than Richard. She's the one who manages the family's problems. After Megan left, Ethan emerged from his hiding place. Why didn't you tell her about me? About my mom? Hank gave him a measured look. Because I'm not sure what her agenda is. Journalists can be allies, but they can also be dangerous. They care about stories, not necessarily about people. We need to be careful who we trust with yours. The next morning, while Hank was in the garden, Ethan used the older man's computer to search for information about Megan Carter. Her investigative news site, the Boston Independent, had published several exposés on powerful figures in the city. Her reputation seemed solid, committed to truth, unafraid of powerful interests. Impulsively, Ethan sent her an email. Ms. Carter, we met briefly at Hank Williams' house. I have information about the Bennetts that might interest you. I am Lucy Miller's son. Within an hour, his phone rang, the prepaid cell Hank had insisted on buying him for emergencies. "This is Megan Carter." "Is this really Lucy Miller's son?" "Yes, my name is Ethan. Can we meet?" They arranged to meet at a public library downtown. Hank was furious when Ethan told him, "This isn't a game, boy. The Bennetts aren't people to mess with." "I'm not messing with them," Ethan argued. "I'm trying to find out what happened to my mother. Megan can help. She has resources we don't." In the end, Hank insisted on accompanying him to the meeting. Megan was waiting in a quiet corner of the reference section, a laptop open in front of her. "So," she said after introductions, "you're claiming to be Lucy Miller's son, and presumably Richard Bennett's son as well." "I'm not claiming anything except that Lucy Miller was my mother," Ethan said carefully. "I have a photograph and witnesses who can confirm the resemblance. The rest, that's what I'm trying to figure out." Megan's eyes sharpened with interest. "How did you come into possession of this photograph?" Ethan explained about finding the wallet, recognizing his mother from his fragmented memories, and his subsequent investigations. As he spoke, Megan took rapid notes. "This is quite a story," she said when he finished. "If true, it would certainly be newsworthy." "I didn't come to you for publicity," Ethan said sharply. "I came because I want to know what happened to my mother, and because I think Victoria Bennett might have had something to do with her disappearance." "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation. It's a concern, based on what people who knew my mother have told me." Megan studied him for a long moment. "What exactly are you hoping I can do? You're an investigative reporter. You have access to records, sources. You can find information that I can't. And in return, if what I find confirms that Richard Bennett is my father, you get the story. But only after I get my answers." Megan considered this. "I'll need to verify some of this independently before I commit resources." "Verify away," Hank said, speaking for the first time. "But understand this, Ethan's welfare comes first. This isn't just a story to us." Over the next week, Ethan stayed with Hank while Megan conducted her preliminary investigation. She confirmed that Lucy Miller had indeed worked for the Bennetts from 2010 to late 2011. She found Lucy's rental history, the apartment in Jamaica Plain where she'd lived with Ethan until he was 5. She even located Ethan's original foster care records, which indicated he'd been placed in the system after his mother relinquished custody due to inability to provide care. But there's no record of what happened to Lucy after that, Megan told them during a meeting at Hank's house. "It's like she vanished. No tax records, no employment history, no property rentals, nothing." "Could she have left the country?" Hank asked. "Possibly," or Megan hesitated. "Or she could be gone," Ethan said flatly. "That's what you're thinking, isn't it? That she could be dead?" "It's one possibility. But there's no record of that either, no certificate, no obituary." "So what now?" Ethan asked. "Now we approach Richard Bennett directly," Megan decided. "With what we know, and if he denies everything?" Hank challenged. "Then we'll have to find more concrete evidence." Megan's expression was determined. DNA testing, for instance. The prospect of confronting Richard Bennett again made Ethan's stomach churn, but he knew it was necessary. They planned carefully. Megan would request an interview with Richard, ostensibly about Bennett Enterprises' bid for the state contract. During the interview, she would reveal what they knew about Lucy and Ethan. "Be prepared for denials," she warned Ethan. "Be prepared for anger. He might try to buy your silence." "I don't want his money," Ethan insisted. "I just want the truth." The day of the interview arrived. Megan went alone as planned, while Ethan and Hank waited at a cafe across the street from the Bennett Enterprises headquarters. Ethan's nerves were frayed, imagining the conversation happening 20 floors above them. 2 hours later, much longer than the scheduled interview, Megan emerged from the building. Her expression gave nothing away as she crossed the street and sat down at their table. "Well?" Ethan demanded. "He wants to meet you," she said simply. "Tomorrow at his home." "What did he say about my mother?" Megan hesitated. "He admitted to knowing her, to caring for her. He claims he didn't know about you until recently." "Did you believe him?" Hank asked. "I'm not sure. He seemed genuinely shocked when I mentioned Ethan, but also resigned as if he'd been expecting this day to come. He said there are things he needs to tell Ethan directly. Things about Lucy." "What things?" Ethan pressed. He wouldn't say. Just that it should come from him, not through me. That night, Ethan barely slept, his mind churning with possibilities. What would Richard tell him? Did he know where Lucy was now? Had he been complicit in whatever had happened to her, or was he another victim of Victoria's machinations? The next morning, as they prepared to leave for the Bennett mansion, Hank pulled Ethan aside. Whatever happens today, remember this. You've already shown more courage than most grown men I know. Whatever Richard Bennett says, whatever he offers or doesn't offer, you are worthy. You matter. With or without the Bennett name. Ethan nodded, throat tight with emotion. The Bennett mansion was even more imposing up close, a sprawling colonial revival on several acres of meticulously landscaped grounds. A security guard met them at the gate, checked their names against a list and directed them to the main entrance. The door opened before they could knock, revealing Richard Bennett himself. Up close, the resemblance between him and Ethan was unmistakable. The same shape of the eyes, the same jawline. Richard's face showed signs of strain, deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said formally. "Please come in." He led them to a study lined with bookshelves, offering them seats in leather chairs arranged before a fireplace, where no fire burned despite the autumn chill. "Victoria is in New York," he said, answering the unasked question. "We can speak freely." For a moment, no one spoke. Richard's eyes remained fixed on Ethan, studying him with an intensity that made the boy want to squirm. Finally, Richard broke the silence. "You have her eyes." "Lucy's eyes. I noticed it the first time you approached me with the photograph, but I didn't want to believe it." He drew a deep breath. "I owe you an explanation, Ethan, about your mother, about why I never knew of your existence until now." "Is she alive?" Ethan asked bluntly. It was the question that had tormented him more than any other. Richard's face contorted with pain. "Yes, Lucy is alive." The weight of those 3 words, "Lucy is alive," seemed to alter the very air in the room. Ethan felt his heart lurch in his chest, a wild hope rising that he tried desperately to contain. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Why did she leave me?" Richard's expression was pained. "It's complicated, and not entirely what you might think." He moved to a desk in the corner, unlocked a drawer, and withdrew a folder. "Before I explain, I want you to see these." He handed the folder to Ethan. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Lucy Miller in a hospital bed, holding a newborn. Lucy in a park, with a toddler who was unmistakably Ethan. Lucy and a slightly older Ethan reading together on a couch. "You've been watching us," Ethan whispered, shock and anger warring in his voice. "All this time." "Thirties are not watching, protecting one from a distance. At least that's what I told myself." Richard's voice was heavy with regret. "I've known about you since before you were born, Ethan. Lucy told me she was pregnant before she left." "Then why—" "Please," Richard held up a hand. "Let me explain from the beginning." He settled back in his chair, looking suddenly older, the weight of years and secrets pressing down on him. "Lucy and I, what we had wasn't supposed to happen. I was married. She worked for my family, but we fell in love, deeply, genuinely in love. When she told me she was pregnant, I was overjoyed. I wanted to leave Victoria, to build a life with Lucy and our child." "So what stopped you?" Megan asked sharply. Richard's eyes darkened. "Victoria discovered the affair. She confronted me with evidence, photos, recordings, said she would destroy Lucy's reputation, ensure she never worked again. But worse than that, she threatened Lucy directly." "Threatened how?" Hank pressed. "Victoria has connections, people who do things for her without asking questions. She made it clear that if I left her for Lucy, if I acknowledged the child, Lucy would suffer consequences. Not just professionally, but physically." Ethan felt cold despite the warmth of the room. "You let her threaten my mother. You didn't protect her." "I tried." Richard's voice rose with emotion. "I gave Lucy money to leave Boston, to start over somewhere Victoria couldn't find her. I hired private security to watch over her discreetly. But Lucy was stubborn, refused to be driven away from her home, her life. She stayed in Boston had you tried to build a life here. And you just, watched from afar?" The bitterness in Ethan's voice was unmistakable. "I visited when I could in secret, supported you both financially through channels Victoria couldn't trace. It wasn't enough, I know that now. But at the time, it seemed like the only way to keep you both safe." "Then what happened?" Megan asked. When Ethan was 5, Richard's face contorted with old pain. Victoria found out. Despite all our precautions, she discovered Lucy was still in Boston, that I was still seeing her, that we had a son. He looked directly at Ethan. She went to Lucy herself. I don't know exactly what she said or did, but afterward Lucy was terrified. Called me in a panic, said she had to disappear, that it wasn't safe for either of you anymore. So she put me in foster care and ran. Ethan couldn't keep the hurt from his voice. No, Richard's response was firm. That was never the plan. Lucy was going to take you with her. We had arranged everything. New identities, a place to live far from Boston, financial support. But before she could collect you from the babysitter, something happened. Lucy vanished for 3 days. When she resurfaced, she was different, afraid in a way I'd never seen before. Different how? Hank asked quietly. Like she'd been broken somehow. Richard's voice was barely audible. She insisted that you would be safer in the foster system than with her. That Victoria would never stop hunting them if they stayed together. I tried to change her mind, but she was adamant. Ethan tried to process this information, this new version of events that challenged everything he'd believed about his abandonment. Where is she now? Arizona, living under a different name. She's been there for the past 7 years. And you've been in contact with her this whole time? The accusation in Ethan's voice was clear. Limited contact. Through intermediaries, mostly. For her safety as much as mine. Her safety or your reputation, Megan interjected. Richard flinched as if struck. I deserve that. But believe it or not, Ms. Carter, there are things more important than reputation, like keeping the mother of my child alive. You keep talking about threats, Ethan said, but they're just words. My mom abandoned me because of words? Not just words, Ethan. Richard's voice dropped. 2 weeks before Lucy disappeared for those 3 days, her apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but everything was searched. Then her brakes failed while driving. Police called it an accident. Then she received photographs in the mail, pictures of you at school at the park playing, with a note that said accidents happen to children too. A chill ran through the room. You think Victoria was behind all that? Hank asked. I know she was, Richard replied grimly. She as good as admitted it to me, said it was necessary to protect the family name. After that, Lucy and I agreed that separation was the only way to keep you safe. Ethan, it was the hardest decision of her life. Ethan sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile this new narrative with the abandonment story he'd carried for years. Part of him wanted to reject it entirely. It was too convenient, too exonerating of the man sitting across from him. But another part recognized the ring of truth in Richard's pain, in the details that matched what he'd learned from Hank and Jasmine. I want to see her, he said finally. I want to hear this from her. Richard nodded slowly. I anticipated you might. I've been in touch with her since you approached me with the photograph. She wants to see you too, but she's afraid. Afraid of what? Megan asked. Victoria, after all this time? Victoria isn't someone who forgets or forgives, Richard said, and she's even more powerful now than she was then. The Bennett family name opens doors, and she spent years cultivating political connections, charitable board positions, all while maintaining an iron grip on our family's financial interests. So what are you proposing? Hank asked. I've arranged for Lucy to come to Boston. Secretly, she'll arrive tomorrow. I have a safe house prepared where you can meet her, Ethan. After that, he spread his hands. That's up to you and Lucy to decide. And Victoria? Megan pressed. What happens when she discovers you've orchestrated this reunion? A grim smile crossed Richard's face. I'm counting on her not finding out until it's too late. Too late for what? Ethan asked. Too late to stop what's already in motion. The cryptic response hung in the air between them. What exactly do you have planned, Mr. Bennett? Megan's reporter instincts were clearly on high alert. Richard studied her for a moment before responding. Miss Carter, I've spent the past 13 years living a lie, watching from a distance as my son grew up without me, communicating in secret with the woman I love, all to appease a wife I haven't truly been married to in any meaningful way since 2011. I'm tired of living that lie. You're going to leave Victoria, Hank stated. Not a question. I'm going to do more than leave her, Richard said quietly. I'm going to make things right. For Lucy, for Ethan, for all the years we've lost. The plan, as Richard outlined it, was both simple and audacious. Lucy would arrive in Boston the following evening under an assumed name. Ethan would meet her at a private residence Richard maintained under a business alias. After their reunion, Richard would join them, and together they would decide their next steps. Victoria returns from New York the day after tomorrow, Richard explained. By then, I want to have everything in place. Legal recognition of Ethan as my son, divorce proceedings initiated, security arrangements for all of us. You think she'll just accept this? Megan asked skeptically. After going to such lengths to keep Lucy and Ethan away? No, Richard admitted. I expect her to fight. That's why I need your help, Miss Carter. My help? Insurance. The story you're investigating, about Bennett Enterprises' business practices. There's more there than you know. Information that would be very damaging to Victoria specifically if it came to light. Megan's eyes narrowed. What kind of information? Financial improprieties. Ethical breaches. Nothing illegal, perhaps, but certainly enough to destroy the pristine public image she's crafted so carefully. I've been gathering documentation for years, my own insurance policy. And you're willing to hand this over to a journalist? Hank sounded incredulous. Conditional on it only being published if Victoria takes action against Lucy or Ethan, Richard clarified. A deterrent, not blackmail. They talked for hours, refining the plan, addressing contingencies. Throughout, Ethan remained largely silent, overwhelmed by revelations and possibilities. His mother was alive, wanted to see him, had never truly abandoned him, at least according to Richard. As they prepared to leave, Richard asked for a moment alone with Ethan. When the others had stepped outside, he turned to the boy with naked vulnerability in his eyes. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, or even your understanding. I failed you, failed to be the father you deserved. Whether you believe it was to protect you or not, the result is the same. You grew up without parents who should have been there for you. Ethan met his gaze steadily. I haven't decided what I believe yet. That's fair, Richard nodded. But I want you to know this. Regardless of what happens next, regardless of whether you ever accept me as your father, you are my son. And I am proud of the young man you've become. Your resilience, your determination. Those are qualities Lucy and I could only hope to have given you. Something in Ethan's chest tightened at these words, a longing he'd never allowed himself to acknowledge for paternal approval, for family connection. Tomorrow, he said, neither accepting nor rejecting Richard's sentiment. We'll see what happens tomorrow. As they drove away from the Bennett mansion, Ethan stared out the window, watching the sprawling estate recede in the distance. So much had changed in just a few hours. The mother he'd believed gone forever was alive and coming to Boston. The father he'd never known was acknowledging him, planning for a future together. It was everything he should want, everything he'd dreamed of during lonely nights in foster homes and on the streets. So why did he feel this gnawing uncertainty? This sense that the story was still incomplete. You're quiet, Megan observed from the front passenger seat. Just thinking. About? It all seems too neat, too convenient. Ethan struggled to articulate his unease. Richard admits everything, says all the right things, has a perfect plan to make everything right. After 13 years of doing nothing, Hank nodded slowly as he drove. I had the same thought. People don't change overnight, especially not men with power who've spent years protecting that power. So you think he's lying? Ethan asked. Not necessarily lying, but perhaps not telling the whole truth. Megan turned in her seat to face him. We should proceed cautiously. Verify what we can independently. But my mom is coming tomorrow. If that's true, then you'll get the answers you need from her, Hank said firmly. And whatever comes next, you won't face it alone. The safe house was a modest brownstone in Cambridge, near enough to Harvard that it blended in with faculty housing. As Hank pulled up to the curb, Ethan's stomach twisted with a mixture of anticipation and dread. After years of wondering, of building scenarios in his mind, he was minutes away from seeing his mother. You ready for this? Hank asked gently. Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice. Megan had insisted on accompanying them, her journalist's instincts on high alert. While she claimed it was for their protection, Ethan suspected she was equally motivated by the potential story unfolding before her. Richard opened the door before they could knock. He looked different today, dressed in jeans and a sweater rather than his usual tailored suit, hair slightly disheveled, the carefully constructed image of corporate power temporarily set aside. "She's here," he said without preamble. "In the living room." Ethan froze, suddenly paralyzed by the enormity of the moment. What if she wasn't what he remembered? What if she didn't want him after all these years? What if this was all some elaborate trick? Hank's weathered hand settled on his shoulder, steadying him. "One step at a time, son. We're right behind you." The living room was simply furnished but comfortable. Sitting on the edge of a blue sofa was a woman with dark hair streaked with grey, hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she looked up and saw Ethan, her face transformed, eyes widening, lips parting in a soft gasp. "Ethan," she whispered, rising to her feet. "My boy, my beautiful boy." She was thinner than the woman in his fragmented memories, lines of worry etched around her eyes and mouth. But those eyes, they were exactly as he remembered, dark and kind and somehow sad even when she smiled. "Mum?" The word felt strange on his lips, foreign yet familiar. Lucy nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, it's me." She took a tentative step forward, then stopped, uncertain. "May I? Would it be all right if I hugged you?" The formality of the question, the hesitation, it broke something in Ethan. This wasn't a cold-hearted woman who had abandoned her child. This was someone who had lost just as much as he had, who stood before him now terrified of rejection. He closed the distance between them in 3 quick steps and let himself be enfolded in her arms. She smelled different, no longer the vanilla scent he remembered, but there was something fundamentally familiar about her embrace, about the way her hand cradled the back of his head. "I'm so sorry," she murmured against his hair. "So sorry for everything you've been through." When they finally separated, both wiping away tears, Ethan became aware that the others had discreetly left the room. It was just the two of them, mother and son, strangers and yet bound by the most profound connection. They sat side by side on the sofa, Lucy never taking her eyes off him, as if afraid he might disappear if she looked away. "Richard told me about your life," she said softly, "about what happened after I had to leave you. Why did you?" The question that had defined Ethan's existence for 7 years. Simple words that carried the weight of a lifetime of abandonment and longing. Lucy drew a shaky breath. "It was never what I wanted, Ethan. You have to believe that. You were everything to me, my whole world." "Then why?" he pressed. "Because I believed it was the only way to keep you safe." Her voice strengthened with conviction. "Victoria Bennett is not just a jealous wife. She's dangerous, capable of things most people couldn't imagine. Richard said she threatened us." Lucy's laugh was bitter. "Threatened? That's putting it mildly." She pushed up the sleeve of her blouse, revealing a jagged scar that ran from her wrist halfway up her forearm. "This wasn't an accident. This was a message, delivered by men Victoria hired 3 days before I put you in foster care." Ethan stared at the scar in horror. "They told me next time it would be you. That accidents happen to children all the time. That no one would ever connect it to the Bennetts." Her voice trembled. "I couldn't take that risk. Not with your life. But why not take me with you when you ran?" The hurt was still there despite his understanding. "Because they were watching me. Constantly, I knew I was being followed." Lucy leaned forward, eyes intense. "I made a choice, Ethan. The hardest choice a mother could ever make. I made myself the target. I disappeared, left a trail for Victoria's people to follow, away from you. I reasoned that if I was gone, if I stayed away from you completely, she would have no reason to harm you." The pieces clicked into place in Ethan's mind, the sudden abandonment, the complete absence of contact over the years. "You were protecting me by staying away," he said slowly. Lucy nodded, fresh tears spilling. "Every day, every hour away from you was torture. But I told myself it was worth it if you were safe. Richard promised to watch over you from a distance, to make sure you were okay." "But I wasn't okay," Ethan said, an edge entering his voice. "I ran away from foster care. I lived on the streets. No one was watching out for me." Lucy's face crumpled. "I didn't know. Richard told me you were safe, that you were in a good home. I found out the truth only recently, when he tracked me down in Arizona after you approached him with the photograph." Her hands trembled as she reached for his. "If I had known what your life was really like, Nothing would have kept me away. Not Victoria, not her threats, nothing. The conviction in her voice was impossible to doubt. Ethan felt the hard knot of resentment he'd carried for years begin to loosen, just slightly. "What happens now?" he asked. Before Lucy could answer, the door opened and Richard entered, followed by Hank and Megan. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Richard said, "but there's something we need to discuss. All of us." They gathered around the small dining table where Richard laid out several folders. "These contain everything we need to move forward," he explained. "Legal documents acknowledging Ethan as my son. Financial arrangements for both of you. Security provisions." "And what about Victoria?" Lucy asked, tension evident in her voice. "I've filed for divorce this morning," Richard said. "My lawyers delivered the papers to her in New York. She'll be served officially within the hour." Lucy's eyes widened in alarm. "You did what?" "Richard, we talked about this. We agreed to wait until we had everything in place. We couldn't wait any longer, not with Ethan having found us. It was time to end the charade. But the plan was to get us somewhere safe first," Lucy protested. "Somewhere Victoria couldn't reach us. You'll be safe here for now. I've hired security, and once everything is finalized..." He was interrupted by the sharp ring of his phone. Looking at the screen, his face paled. "It's Victoria." The room fell silent as Richard answered, putting the phone on speaker. "Richard," Victoria's voice was cool, controlled. "I just had the most interesting conversation with my lawyer. Care to explain?" "I think the papers speak for themselves, Victoria. Our marriage is over. After 20 years, with no warning, no discussion." Her tone remained eerily calm. "This isn't like you, Richard. You don't make impulsive decisions." "It's not impulsive. It's long overdue." A soft laugh came through the speaker. "This is about her, isn't it? About Lucy Miller. She's resurfaced after all these years." Richard's eyes met Lucy's across the table, a silent warning passing between them. "This is about us, Victoria. About the fact that we haven't had a real marriage in over a decade." "Don't insult my intelligence." Victoria's voice hardened. "Where are you right now?" "At your little pied-à-terre in Cambridge." "The one you think I don't know about?" The blood drained from Richard's face. "How did you... Oh, Richard, did you really think I wouldn't keep tabs on all your properties? All your accounts?" Victoria's laugh was like glass breaking. "I've known about your little bolt hole for years, just as I've known about the money you've been funneling to Arizona. $5,000 a month to a woman named Laura Miller. Not very creative with the alias, was she?" Lucy's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with fear. "What do you want, Victoria?" Richard's voice was tight with tension. "The same thing I've always wanted. Family stability, the Bennett name preserved. Our position in society maintained." Her tone became almost conversational. "Tell Lucy I'll be gracious. She can have a comfortable settlement, very comfortable, if she disappears again, permanently this time, and takes the boy with her." "His name is Ethan," Richard growled. "He's my son. A technicality. One that needn't become public knowledge." Victoria paused. "You have 24 hours to reconsider the divorce, Richard. After that, things will become unpleasant for everyone involved." The call ended, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. "She knows everything," Lucy whispered, terror evident in her face. "She's known all along." "We need to leave," Richard said decisively. "Now, tonight, before she can..." He was interrupted by Megan. "Before she can what, Mr. Bennett?" "Send more men to deliver messages? Arrange more accidents? Isn't it time this stopped? Isn't it time Victoria Bennett faced consequences for her actions?" "You don't understand what she's capable of," Lucy began. "Actually, I think I'm beginning to," Megan countered. She turned to Richard. "You mentioned documentation, evidence of Victoria's ethical breaches. What exactly does that entail?" Richard hesitated, glancing at Lucy. "Tell her," Lucy urged. "It's time." With a heavy sigh, Richard opened the last folder. "Victoria has been using Bennett Enterprises as a front for her family's less savory business interests. Money laundering, primarily. The Bennett name provides legitimacy. Our charitable foundation, a way to move millions without scrutiny." "And you've known about this?" Megan asked incredulously. "Not at first. By the time I discovered it, I was already compromised. My signature on documents I hadn't properly reviewed. My apparent oversight of transactions I'd never authorized." "So you're complicit," Megan stated flatly. Technically, yes. Though I've spent years gathering evidence, documenting everything, initially as protection for myself, later as leverage to ensure Lucy's safety. And you never went to the authorities because Victoria made it clear what would happen to Lucy if I did. Richard ran a hand through his hair. It was a stalemate. I had evidence that could destroy her. She had the means to harm the woman I loved. But now that stalemate is broken, Hank observed quietly. Now that Lucy's here, that Ethan's in the picture. Richard nodded grimly. Victoria won't back down. She has too much to lose. The respectability of the Bennett name means everything to her. Then maybe it's time that name lost its respectability, Megan said, reaching for the folder. This is a news story, Mr. Bennett. A big one. Publishing this won't just hurt Victoria, Richard warned. It will bring down Bennett Enterprises. Hundreds of innocent employees will lose their jobs. And if we don't? Lucy challenged. If we run like I did before, how long before Victoria finds us again? How many more years will Ethan have to spend looking over his shoulder? All eyes turned to Ethan, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. He felt the weight of their attention, the implicit acknowledgement that somehow his opinion mattered in this decision. I spent 7 years thinking my mother abandoned me, he said slowly. 7 years believing I wasn't wanted, that I didn't matter to anyone. He looked at Lucy, then at Richard. I don't want to run. I don't want to hide. I want this to end. Lucy reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. Then we end it together. Richard nodded, decision made. He slid the folder across the table to Megan. Everything you need is here. Bank records, shell companies, transactions, names of associates. But we need to move quickly. Once Victoria realizes what we're doing, I'll need a few hours to verify this independently, Megan said, already flipping through the documents. And we'll need protection while I work on the story. I know someone, Hank said unexpectedly. From my military days. Private security now. Someone not connected to the Bennetts in any way. I'll make the call. As plans were made around him, Ethan found himself watching his mother's face, memorizing every detail. The way her eyebrows drew together when she was worried. The small scar near her right eyebrow that hadn't been there in his memories. The determined set of her jaw so similar to his own. She caught him looking and smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her face, making her look suddenly younger, more like the mother in his fragmented memories. It's going to be okay, she whispered just for him. Whatever happens next, we face it together. I promise I'll never leave you again. And for the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to believe in a promise from an adult. To believe that maybe, just maybe, the long, lonely chapter of his life was finally coming to an end. Dawn broke over Boston, pale light filtering through the safe house windows. Ethan had barely slept, his mind racing with everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. The reunion with his mother. The revelations about Victoria Bennett. The decision to stop running and fight back. Hank's security contact, a taciturn former Marine named Mike Lawson, had arrived just after midnight with 2 associates. They now patrolled the perimeter of the house, professional and vigilant. Megan had left shortly after, clutching the folder of evidence, promising to return once she had verified its contents and prepared her story. In the kitchen, Ethan found his mother making pancakes, a domestic scene so ordinary yet so extraordinary that it made his throat tighten with emotion. "You're up early," Lucy said, smiling as she flipped a pancake. "Hungry?" Ethan nodded, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "Couldn't sleep." "Me neither." She placed a plate in front of him. Too many thoughts. Too many possibilities. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Ethan voiced the question that had been nagging at him all night. What happens after? If Megan publishes the story and Victoria is exposed, what happens to us? Lucy set down her fork, considering. I've been thinking about that too. I have a small house in Arizona. It's nothing fancy, but it's home. You could come live with me there if you wanted, or... She hesitated. Richard has suggested we might start over somewhere new. The 3 of us, like a family. The concept was so foreign to Ethan that he struggled to imagine it. Maybe, eventually. Lucy reached across the counter to take his hand. But Ethan, I want you to understand something. Whatever happens with Richard and me, whatever choices we make, you are my priority. Your happiness, your well-being, that comes first. The sincerity in her eyes was unmistakable, and Ethan felt a warmth spreading through him, a tentative hope taking root. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Richard, looking exhausted but determined. He poured himself coffee before joining them at the counter. "Megan called," he said without preamble. "She's verified enough to move forward with the story. She's meeting her editor this morning. If all goes well, it will be published online by noon." "And Victoria?" Lucy asked, tension evident in her voice. "Still in New York, according to my sources. But she's booked on a flight back to Boston that lands at 11. So she'll be in the air when the story breaks," Ethan observed. Richard nodded grimly. "A small tactical advantage, but I'll take it." The hours that followed were strangely anticlimactic, a quiet before the storm. They waited, making small talk, sharing memories, tiptoeing around the deeper conversations that would need to happen eventually. Ethan learned that his mother had been working as a librarian in Arizona, that she'd never remarried or had other children, that she kept a photo of him as a toddler by her bed all these years. At 11:30, Megan called again. "It's live," she told Richard, her voice tight with excitement. "Front page of the Boston Independent website. My editor's already fielding calls from national outlets wanting to pick up the story." Richard thanked her and hung up, turning to Lucy and Ethan with a complex expression, relief mixed with apprehension and a touch of grief. "It's done," he said simply. "The Bennett name won't recover from this." Lucy moved to his side, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "You did the right thing, Richard, finally." "Did I?" He looked suddenly old, the weight of his choices evident in the slump of his shoulders. "Hundreds of people will lose their jobs. A company that's been in my family for generations will collapse. All because I wasn't brave enough to stand up to Victoria years ago." "You were trying to protect us," Lucy said gently. "I was trying to have it both ways," Richard corrected bitterly. "Keep my position, my wealth, my social standing, and still have you and Ethan in my life even if at a distance." It was selfish. Ethan watched this exchange with growing understanding. For all his wealth and power, Richard Bennett was just a man who had made mistakes, who had tried to navigate an impossible situation and failed many times before finally doing the right thing. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, echoing his earlier question to his mother. Richard seemed to shake himself from his moment of self-recrimination. "Now we wait for Victoria's response. She'll be landing soon if she hasn't already. When she sees the story." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew Victoria Bennett wouldn't go down without a fight. They didn't have to wait long. Just after noon, Richard's phone rang, Victoria's name flashing on the screen. He answered on speaker. "You fool!" Victoria's voice was ice-cold, controlled rage in every syllable. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "What I should have done years ago," Richard replied steadily. "It's over, Victoria. The truth is out." "The truth?" She laughed, a brittle, dangerous sound. "You think this ends with one news story? You think you've won. This isn't about winning. It's about doing what's right. For Ethan, for Lucy. Yes, your little replacement family." Victoria's voice dripped with contempt. "Tell me, Richard, does the boy know the whole story? Does he know why his precious mother really left him? Does he know what she agreed to?" Lucy tensed beside Ethan, her face suddenly pale. "Don't do this, Victoria," Richard warned. "Why not? If we're all about truth today, let's have all of it." Victoria's voice took on a cruel edge. "Tell him, Lucy. Tell your son about our agreement. Tell him what you traded for his life." Ethan looked at his mother in confusion. "What is she talking about?" Lucy's eyes filled with tears. "Victoria, please. He's just a child. He's old enough to know what kind of woman his mother really is." Victoria's voice was relentless. "Tell him how you agreed to never contact him again. Tell him how you signed away your parental rights in exchange for a monthly stipend. Tell him how you chose money over your own son." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Ethan stared at his mother, wanting her to deny it, to explain, to make it not true. "It wasn't like that," Lucy whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I signed papers. Yes, I took the money. But not for me, for you, Ethan. Victoria threatened to have you removed from foster care, sent somewhere I could never find you if I didn't cooperate. The money went into a trust for you, for college, for your future. I never touched a penny of it." "She's lying," Victoria said dismissively. "She took the money and ran. Ask Richard. He set up the payments." Ethan turned to Richard, who nodded slowly. I did set up the payments, but Lucy's telling the truth. Every dollar went into a trust for Ethan, a trust that Victoria was never supposed to know about. But I find out everything eventually, Victoria said coldly. Just as I found out about your little reunion today. Did you really think your security precautions would keep me in the dark? I've had the Cambridge house watched for years. The implication sent a chill through the room. Victoria, Richard's voice was suddenly urgent. Whatever you're planning, don't. It's too late. The story is published. People know, people can forget. Stories can be retracted. Evidence can disappear. Victoria's tone was almost conversational now. But first I need to tie up loose ends. The line went dead. Richard immediately tried to call back, but there was no answer. She's coming here, Lucy said, panic rising in her voice. She knows where we are. Richard was already on the phone to the security team outside. Full alert. Victoria Bennett may be en route to our location. Consider her dangerous. Ethan felt strangely calm amidst the rising tension. She can't hurt us now. The truth is out. You don't know Victoria, Lucy said, her face ashen. She doesn't accept defeat, ever. Richard finished his call and turned to them, decision made. We're leaving now. The security team has a car ready in the back alley. We'll go to New Hampshire. I have a lake house there under a different name. We'll stay there until this blows over. They moved quickly, gathering the few possessions they'd brought to the safe house. As they prepared to leave, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from Megan. Story going viral. National pickup. You safe? He quickly replied, leaving now. Victoria knows where we are. Her response was immediate. Police notified. Stay safe. We'll call later. They were headed for the back door when the security alarm blared. Richard's phone rang. Mike Lawson, the head of security. We've got a situation, sir. Black SUV just pulled up out front. 4 occupants. 1 female matching Mrs. Bennett's description. They're approaching the house. Richard cursed under his breath. Hold them off. We're leaving through the back. Understood. We'll delay them as long as we can. They hurried through the kitchen to the rear exit, Richard leading the way. But as he reached for the door, it swung open violently, revealing a large man in a dark suit, one of Victoria's private security team. Before anyone could react, Mike Lawson appeared behind the man, efficiently subduing him with a precise strike. Go now, Mike urged, holding the door open. The car's 50 yards down the alley. We'll hold them here. They ran, Lucy gripping Ethan's hand tightly as they sprinted down the narrow alleyway. Behind them, shouts and the sound of a struggle echoed from the house. The promised car was waiting, engine running, a grim-faced driver at the wheel. Richard yanked open the back door. Get in! Ethan and Lucy piled in, Richard following close behind. The driver immediately accelerated, the car shooting forward just as another vehicle, a black SUV, screeched to a halt at the alley entrance. Go, go! Richard urged the driver, who skillfully maneuvered through the narrow space and onto a side street. In the rearview mirror, Ethan caught a glimpse of a woman standing in the alley. Tall, elegant, expensively dressed with a face contorted in fury. Victoria Bennett, seeing her quarry escape. The car sped through Cambridge, taking a circuitous route to evade any potential pursuit. Lucy held Ethan close, her body trembling slightly. Richard was on the phone again, giving terse instructions, making arrangements. We'll head north, he told them after hanging up. I've alerted the local police about Victoria. They'll be looking for her SUV, and Megan's article is everywhere now. Victoria's face is splashed across every news site in Boston. Will that stop her? Ethan asked. It might not stop her, but it will limit what she can do, Richard replied grimly. Victoria cares about appearances above all else. Now that she's exposed, she'll be calculating her next move carefully. As they crossed the bridge out of Boston, Ethan's phone rang. Hank. Are you all right? The older man demanded without preamble. I just heard from Megan what's happening. We're safe, Ethan assured him. Headed north. Victoria showed up at the safe house, but we got away. Thank God, Hank breathed. Listen, I'm coming to meet you. Just tell me where. After a brief consultation with Richard, they arranged to rendezvous at a roadside diner in southern New Hampshire. As they drove, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. Ethan leaned against his mother, drawing comfort from her presence, from the arm she kept securely around his shoulders. I'm sorry, she whispered. About what Victoria said, about the agreement. It doesn't matter, Ethan said, surprised to find he meant it. You did what you had to do, to protect me. Lucy kissed the top of his head, a gesture so maternal, so achingly familiar despite the years apart, that it brought fresh tears to Ethan's eyes. 2 hours later, they sat in a booth at the back of a nondescript diner, mugs of coffee in front of the adults, a chocolate milkshake for Ethan. Hank had arrived 20 minutes earlier, his reliable old Buick now following them as an extra precaution. Richard's phone buzzed with an incoming text. He read it, eyebrows rising in surprise. "It's from my lawyer," he said. "Victoria's been detained by police at her Boston office. They're questioning her about financial irregularities at Bennett Enterprises." "Detained? You mean arrested?" Lucy asked. "Not yet, but it sounds like it's heading that way." Richard looked both relieved and somewhat shell-shocked. Apparently, after Megan's article broke, several Bennett employees came forward with additional evidence. Things even I didn't know about. "So it's really over?" Ethan asked cautiously, hardly daring to believe it. "It's the beginning of the end," Richard corrected. "There will be investigations, probably trials. The company will likely go into receivership. But the immediate danger—" He reached across the table to take Lucy's hand. "Yes, I think that's over." As they sat in that anonymous diner making plans for the days ahead, Ethan felt a strange sense of peace settling over him. The past week had brought more changes, more revelations, more emotional upheaval than the previous 7 years combined. He'd found his mother, discovered his father, learned the truth behind his abandonment. And while that truth was complicated, messy, not nearly as straightforward as the abandonment story he'd carried for so long, it was real. And in that reality, he'd found something he'd stopped believing in: family. 3 days later, they stood on the deck of Richard's lake house, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. Victoria Bennett had been formally arrested, charged with financial crimes that made national headlines. Bennett Enterprises was in chaos, its stock plummeting, but Richard had already announced plans to ensure severance packages for all employees and to cooperate fully with authorities. The future remained uncertain. Richard would likely face legal consequences of his own, though his cooperation would mitigate the worst of it. Lucy was considering whether to return to Arizona or start fresh in New England. And Ethan. Ethan was enrolled to start at a local school in the fall, a normal teenager for the first time in his life. "What are you thinking?" Lucy asked, coming to stand beside him at the railing. "About how much has changed," Ethan replied honestly. "A week ago I was sleeping under a store awning, collecting cans for recycling money. Now I'm here with you, with—" He glanced toward Richard, who was speaking quietly with Hank by the grill. "With family. Too much too fast?" Lucy asked gently. Ethan considered the question. Maybe, but also right somehow. Like pieces clicking into place. Lucy smiled, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "We have time now. Time to get to know each other again. Time to build something new." "I'd like that," Ethan said simply. As darkness fell over the lake, they gathered around the table on the deck, sharing a meal together. Lucy, Richard, Ethan, and Hank, who had become an unexpected but welcome part of their makeshift family. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and moments of reflective silence. Later, as Ethan prepared for bed in the room that was now his, at least temporarily, he took out the photograph that had started it all, the faded image of his mother that had fallen from Richard's wallet that day in Copley Square. He placed it carefully on the nightstand, next to a new addition, a photo taken that afternoon of him with Lucy and Richard, the three of them standing awkwardly but hopefully together on the dock. The past would always be there, the abandonment, the years of loneliness, the secrets and lies. But for the first time, Ethan could see a future stretching out before him that wasn't defined by those wounds. A future with family, with belonging, with truth, however complicated that truth might be. As he drifted toward sleep, Ethan thought about the strange, winding path that had led him here. How a chance encounter, a dropped wallet, a glimpse of a familiar face had changed everything. How the courage to ask questions, to demand answers, had unlocked a story far more complex than the simple abandonment narrative he'd carried for so long. In the warm darkness of his new room, Ethan made a promise to himself to honor that courage, to keep asking questions, to seek truth even when it was painful or complicated, Because in the end it was truth that had set him free. Truth that had reunited him with his mother. Truth that had given him at long last a place to belong. Outside his window, the lake lapped gently at the shore, a soothing rhythm like a lullaby. And for the first time in years, Ethan Miller slept deeply and dreamlessly, without fear, without loneliness, without the gnawing emptiness that had been his constant companion. He was home. Dear listeners, we hope that Ethan's journey from the streets of Boston to finding his true family has touched your hearts. The power of truth, the strength of a mother's love, and the courage to face our past are themes that resonate in all of us. If you've enjoyed this emotional story of family reunited against all odds, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating narratives that explore the complexity of human relationships. Hit the like button if you found yourself moved by Ethan, Lucy, and Richard's story, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences with family reconciliation. We have prepared a special playlist with equally moving stories of lost connections and newfound bonds. You'll find it linked on your left. Remember, every family has its secrets, but as Ethan discovered, sometimes uncovering those secrets is the only path to healing. We'll be back tomorrow with another unforgettable tale. Until then, we're waiting to hear from you in the comments.